Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Consulting with Authority. This is your host, Scott Cantrell, joined by a gentleman that I am truly privileged and honored to be able to interview today. I've had the privilege of knowing John for a number of months because we're both involved with a group that we participate in. And just recently, at the end of 2021, I got to hear him speak and present on an incredible topic that he is now a specialized thought leader in. And it was incredibly eye-opening for me. And as soon as I heard him speak, I knew that sometime in the future, I had to have him on Consulting with Authority if he would be willing. And he has been gracious enough to carve out some time and be here. John Blumberg is a national author, speaker, and thought leader on the subject of integrity. John, thank you so much for being here.
Scott, so good to be here with you. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same here. Absolutely. I've got my pen and paper ready to go. So, John, I know that you didn't start out on this, what seems from an outsider looking in, you didn't start focused on this narrow slice, this narrow concept, so to speak, of integrity at the beginning of your career. This is not, you didn't grow, you didn't start out growing up, wanting to grow up to be an expert on integrity. So kind of give us just a general overview of the trajectory of your career and what led you to that point.
Yeah, so I think what's probably most shocking in what I do today is I actually majored in accounting, which maybe is where the integrity comes from. I don't know.
Sure, it could be, yeah.
But that was my major, which has served me well, certainly as an entrepreneur and a business owner. But I was with Arthur Andersen for 18 years. I actually was in audit. The first 5 years I was with the firm, and then shifted my focus from numbers to people and spent the remaining 13 years at Andersen working in the HR area, but eventually into recruiting, and eventually went into a role to help direct our recruiting worldwide, which is how I got to Chicago. In those years, though, Scott, what I would say is I became where maybe in my studies in an accounting, I was a student of the numbers. But when I shifted over, I really did become a student of the human condition in a high-performing culture. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I was grounded. But when I went into a firm-wide role to help direct our recruiting around the world, I just got a chance to speak a lot. And somewhere in there, I thought, I really love the speaking thing. And so to be very direct on this, I decided to give up my career at Andersen, and really because I love the speaking, and I thought I can talk on leadership. And so I left behind my career 5 years before Arthur Andersen, is one of the greatest consulting firms in the world, imploded.
Right.
I went off and started this career in speaking. And it was on general leadership. And in fact, it may have been the implosion of Arthur Andersen, which the heartbreak thing now is that some people say I've never heard of it before, but it was the gold standard in the consulting world of a firm that took 90 years to build and literally 6 weeks to implode. Wow. And it happened to be around the Enron scandal. Right. It's a complicated story, but it probably changed everything for me because I love the firm. It was an incredible culture. And what I would say is that it really, something struck within me to say, this isn't about Arthur Andersen or Enron. It's about all of us. And I didn't know what that was, but it really caught my attention. And so I started shifting my focus more into core values, and then eventually laser focused into integrity. And over the 4 books that I've written, I can almost, looking back, not when I was doing it all, but looking back, I could almost see the seeds that were evolving within me over that course of time to come to this laser focus on integrity.
Sure. Well, I remember last November when I had the honor of hearing you speak and share that information, just a short presentation, but even in just a few minutes, my brain was just overflowing with this different way of thinking about integrity and how it's not just an abstract idea, and it means more and has a more pervasive influence on our lives than we ever think. And I want to dive into that in just a second, but tell us a little bit about the nature of the work that you do now with your consulting practice in your firm. Who do you serve? Who do you focus on helping? And what types of engagements? How do you help them is really what I'm asking.
Yeah. So I still have stayed very focused primarily in the professional services area. I've done some in healthcare. Alaska Airlines has been a big client in my journey. But I grew up in the professional services firm. And so a lot of my focus has been there. Because of the nature of integrity, I do spend a lot of time focused in the C-suite with the leadership. But the truth is, integrity can show up anywhere at any time in anyone. Sure. But those are the arenas I generally speak in. And it really is around solely this idea of getting leaders to completely see integrity, reimagine it, rediscover it in a completely new way, because I think we make a huge assumption there. And oftentimes what we do is we turn it into a compliance exercise. And and that's very common in I think most organizations. And what I've often said is, and compliance always has its place. But what I do believe is the billions of dollars that are spent on compliance and rules is because we haven't valued integrity to begin with at the very root level. But that's generally the arena that I operate in, although it's one of those where the topic is applicable to any organization or anyone, sure. But it's a matter of where your outreach is. The in-reach, sometimes there are bits and pieces that come in where, I'll address those, but my focus mainly in outreach has been, in the executive suite. And I have, right now I'm coaching 2 public company CEOs. And again, it's always around this topic. And then, I also have groups that the public can sign up to participate in what I call the circle of integrity. So that's kind of the breadth of the way the information goes out. When I started, Scott, I was all about being a speaker. Sure. And somewhere along the way, I figured out, no, I'm not a speaker, I'm a messenger. And that message can come out in books or presentations or coaching. So it kind of filters out in different channels.
That's a fantastic note and just a really important reframing, I think, certainly for me to hear, but I think for everybody who's listening and watching who may, depending on what label, right, we put on ourselves, whether it's speaker or coach or consultant, the reality is so many of us do all of those things in some capacity. We may call it slightly different things or think of coaching as, but the reality is, yes, at the end of the day, for us in this world of where we have a skill, knowledge, or expertise or service, and we're trying to impact, in most cases, the lives of another organization or an individual within a business, at the end of the day, we are just transferring information. We are a messenger at the core of who we are. And so it's a really important note, and one that I'm making note of here, because it's just a great note for me, because I don't need to necessarily lock myself into this world of business development consultant. At the end of the day, I'm sharing a message around how organizations and businesses can grow more effectively and more efficiently. So that's probably a very valuable note for everybody who's listening.
For me too, Scott, one of the things when I went into speaking, I saw a lot of speakers who were writing books. Right. And I think a lot of times because they felt like they had to. Sure. And frankly, some of the products look like they wrote them because they felt like they had to. They weren't that great.
I've read some of those books too. Yeah.
But I was adamant that I was not going to write a book. I mean, I literally said, I'm a speaker and not a writer, that my gift was, speaking the oral word. Yeah. And that's probably where I realized, and it was right after Arthur Andersen imploded. A good friend said, your time has come to write. And that's really where I woke up to the idea, you're not a speaker, that's a vehicle. Yeah. You're a messenger. And that's where, the writing started.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That makes so much sense. And it is important. I think it is important too, for all of us, right? People listening, watching, and us, to realize that at the end of the day, if what we truly want, and I think it is true for most people in our space, in our consulting space, if we truly want to improve the condition of the people that we serve, right, truly bring value to them in a meaningful way, then the question is not, how do I do that through speaking, or how do I do that through writing, this narrow channel? The question is, how do I do that? what channels could I use, right? That will be the most effective for the people that I serve. And it may be speaking, it may be writing, it may be consulting or coaching, it may be all of the above. And so being open to that, I think is really valuable. So that's a great, again, just a great note to remind us all that we are messenger first. So let's dive into some of your work on integrity, because again, I still go back and I've looked at my notes from the session that you did in November multiple times, and have found myself quoting you, sometimes paraphrased, but have found myself quoting, what I learned from that session. I think one of the things that struck me the most from the presentation was how you define integrity, or maybe how you don't define integrity. So maybe you can speak to that. And, I remember, and I'm just going to be completely transparent with you, John. I remember when you were being introduced for that session, and it was basically, John's going to speak on integrity. And I'm like, well, isn't integrity just, a sentence or two definition? I mean, isn't that kind of the end, beginning and end of it? I mean, don't you either have integrity or not? I mean, like, I really couldn't. I was like, what are we going to hear about? And I already knew you a little bit. And so I knew it was going to be gold. And so I was ready to take notes. So I was like, what could he possibly talk about? And then you spent the next few minutes just blowing my mind. So let's just kind of start with how you think about integrity and how you define it, or again, don't define it.
Yeah. And I think the way that what was going through your mind, and thanks for the transparency, because that's integrity. But what I do find the conventional wisdom is, and I over and over continue to see this happen. If we were playing Family Feud and the question was, what is the one word people most often use when to define integrity, that word would be honesty, which is totally understandable. Yeah. Or what's the one phrase that people would use? And the one phrase most often is what you do when no one is watching. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest that those are not definitions of integrity, that those are lagging indicators of integrity. In fact, one thing I've said before is what integrity is not defined by what you do when no one is watching. What you do when no one is watching is defined by your integrity. Wow. And it's a flip of the words, but it changes everything. So 15 years ago, when I really focused solely on integrity, when I was beginning to say, this is where all of my energy needs to go, there were three words that I found were the best words to define integrity in the most comprehensive way. And those words were whole, entire, and undiminished. And if you really think about it, it sounds like integrated, like connection, not only connected internally, but connected collectively to anyone and anything. So I like to come at it from an idea that it's far more about connection. And connection, what flows out of that can be honesty, although that can get to be a complicated question within itself. Is there times where you're being honest where it lacks integrity? In fact, I put a thought for the day out one time that said, when you are claiming to be honest, but you are creating disconnection, is that really dishonest? And so it's a complicated thing that spins your head around a bit, but I really am trying to tease apart those two concepts because they're so interrelated, almost in a trite or a cliche kind of fashion. Sure. And so I like to look at it in a much richer and deeper way. And in some ways, what I'd say, Scott, is it really does take some unlearning of what we've assumed about integrity to reimagine it and rediscover it.
Yeah, that is excellent. And again, I was part of that majority that you're talking about, right? In terms of how I thought about it. And I just hadn't considered this idea that I hadn't considered flipping the words around like you just described, right? It just made sense to me. Oh yeah, what you do when no one's watching. Yeah, okay. Who are you really? But what you're suggesting is that your integrity is what determines your behavior. Your behavior is not determined by your behavior is determined by your integrity. And so integrity is the core. Integrity is where it begins. And then what you do while no one's watching is created by that. Honesty as a byproduct, as a lagging indicator, which I think is so true.
Yeah, it's where everything flows from.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing too, going back to what you had initially said, one thing that I find is people look and think of integrity almost like an object, like something you have. I have integrity. Or we arrogantly judge other people like this person has it and this person doesn't. And what I would suggest is that when it comes to integrity, it's a state of being. And the truth is, all of us on any given moment, on any given day, in any given relationship or conversation or decision are in some degree of integrity, which is much more complicated in the sense that it always begs for your awareness and attention, that it's not something you just have and it's always in play. And that it makes it more complicated, but in some way it makes it far more adventurous as well.
Well, sure. And I think by making that statement, it allows us to be human beings as opposed to human beings that are capable of mistakes and capable of grace and capable of mercy and capable of forgiveness, as opposed to and capable of changing our minds about something, as opposed to the expectation that says you either are or you are not. You either have or you do not have integrity. And it's like, to your point, it's not so simple. In fact, that brings me to one thing that I remember from your presentation, and one thing that absolutely did strike me. And this was this idea of what you referred to as drift, related to integrity. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that is I literally remember when I wrote these couple of sentences down, I was sitting at a Starbucks in Naperville, Illinois. Although I thought authors went to mountain chalets to write. If they hadn't remodeled a Starbucks, I could take you to the table. I was writing it. But I wrote it down and it simply said this, that we don't go running away from our values, we go drifting away. And one day we wake up in a place that we never meant to be, drifting in a direction we never would have chosen. And the truth is that when I wrote that, although I do remember where I was when I wrote it, which probably ought to tell me something, but I didn't think that much about it. I was just writing. It was just, I always say as to an author, don't edit as you type or write, just let it flow out. So I really hadn't paid a lot of attention. And it was only when I started giving keynotes on the content, and then when the books went out, almost 95% of the people, when they write about it or come up at the end of a presentation, they literally walk up and say, it's the drift. And I should have known from my own life experience, but I think that's why people resonate, because the truth is we've all drifted. And maybe even more importantly, we will all drift again. Because as you so named it, we're all human. And in some ways, that drift is such a teacher to hone our integrity, that the drift is, it can be a problem, especially if you don't catch it. But it also is such a gift because it allows for teachable moments. And it's a real important element of really a deeper understanding of integrity.
I remember when you talked about that on the presentation, and I think we, the audience was probably on mute, but I think I remember saying out loud, "Wow, that's me," that has been me. And to your point that you made earlier, at any given moment in any given scenario, we are in a state of integrity, right? Where we are in the spectrum may vary depending on the scenario and situation, I suppose. From this point of view of drift and moving away, I think I got the quote close. We go drifting away from our core values, drifting in a direction we never would have chosen. As that drift happens, it's one of those gradual things, like the frog in the boiling pot of water, I suppose. And we may not notice it at the beginning, but at some point we get so far away from who we are supposed to be, who we know we can be, and we realize, I'm quite a bit of distance from that shoreline. And it's time for me to get back there. What what types of, let me just ask the question this way. How can one observe or notice that they're drifting sooner so they don't get so far away from the shoreline and they can course correct in more real time or faster and easier? Any thoughts or ideas on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's where the work comes in, is being able to dig to our core values, which also is another area that I think we misinterpret or we misunderstand. In fact, oftentimes what I find is people will think of their core values through the lens of what do I value? And that's very different. That's not a bad perspective on paying attention to what you value, but those are not your core values. And in fact, the other way I've hit on integrity, which is contra, I think, to many individuals' list of core values, and also certainly many organizations, is that integrity is not a core value, which surprises a lot of people. And what I say is it's the fabric of every value. It's the integrator to what we name as our values. But if you do the work and digging to your core, and I frame it out through your digging through behaviors and wants and needs and opinions and beliefs, which are all things we value, but digging really to the core. Once that core is realized, and that's not a pick your five favorite off a list of 30 or take an algorithm that spits it out for you. That's a wrestling match, and probably over at least a year of, you work on a little bit, put it away, work on a little bit, put it away. But eventually, I think that eventually begins to become more and more clear, especially when you start to separate out behaviors, wants, needs, opinions, and beliefs, which are really hard to move out of that core value bucket. But once you do, and you get real core clarity on what are your core values, then I believe what happens is you keep anchoring back to that. And when you continue to anchor to it, and I mean this literally every day, what you'll find is you're still going to drift, but you're going to see it much sooner. And again, the drift isn't the problem. It's the lack of noticing the drift. And you so aptly name, the shoreline keeps getting further and further away. What's really dangerous is when you can no longer see the shoreline, and now you have no idea how far you're drifting. You've lost perspective at that point.
Wow. No, that's, I was just using the metaphor because it made sense, but it sounds like it works beautifully in that example. I hadn't considered losing sight of the land. But certainly, even at times, moments, very difficult, traumatic, tragic experiences in my own life. I at least for some period of time. Now, fortunately, I've had people around me to say it's over there, right? It's that way in terms of where the land is. But I felt that way, and I guess anybody that lives long enough, has the privilege of living long enough, is going to have those types of experiences, I suspect that they can be catalyzed or triggered in a lot of ways, not necessarily through a negative experience. They could possibly be triggered through a euphoric or very positive experience where you suddenly lose touch. Things are going so well that you lose touch with that core. You pull the anchor up.
In fact, Scott, you name a really good thing there, that because I think a lot of times people think a drift can be through very negative things. Oftentimes I've seen some of the greatest drifts in the midst of great success.
Fascinating.
And one thing I always suggest people is you need to have people in your life, just as you were saying, point you there, is what I would say they're drift catchers. And you give them permission to bring you back. You just say, if you see me drifting, call me out. And they can be they have to be people that love you enough to tell you the truth, and you love them enough to accept the truth when you hate what they're telling you. But very often it is in the midst of great success. And think about this for a second with professional athletes or singers, artists, or politicians, where you have people in the inner circle, and the inner circle quits being drift catchers because they're afraid to say the truth.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid they're going to get kicked out of the inner circle, which is why sometimes very successful people, it's so heartbreaking because they don't have anybody that can really be a drift guard or a drift catcher for them.
Gosh, that is so true. I hadn't even considered that aspect of it. But those, I mean, talk about, a laundry list of examples that you could point to that are publicly available examples.
Yes.
I think, we see. What's interesting about this is, as you describe this, and as I think through my own experience, professional, personal, as I think through news headlines and what happens within the world, you use the word integrity by its sheer, nature of the word is integrated. I start to see, again, I'm using your metaphors, but they're very spot on. I see integrity being woven throughout the fabric of society. And you can point to something and say, I don't know everything that happened, but clearly that individual or that organization or that group of people or whatever it may be, they were at drift in order for that to happen. Because, I know if it's someone that you're intimately familiar with in some way, or them, they're a loved one, I know who they are. I know what their core is. Mm-hmm. And so I know that what happened, or that experience, or that action they took, or that inaction that they didn't take, I know that was because of drift, not because of who they are at their core.
Yes. And I would say this too, Scott, because I do think you point out when we know somebody, we can see the drift because we know the core, we know the person. What I would suggest is whenever you see a downfall, a tragedy, whether it's a politician, whether it's a corporate leader, whether it's a pastor, whatever the case may be, you can always know that they've drifted, because I'm a big believer. Now, I'm an optimist, but I'm a big believer that everyone at their core is good. The core is there. Now, the question is, have they defined it? And even if they've defined it, then have they drifted? But we can almost know that there was a drift in play, because I think we're all wired with that goodness. The question is, have we been in touch with it? Have we discovered it? Yeah. And then have we gotten distracted in the drift along the way?
Yeah, I completely agree with your optimism. I think it's the right perspective. I think it's the truth, but even if we can't know it's the truth, I think it's the right perspective to have. And that idea of forgiveness and mercy and grace and just this nature of this fallible being called a human being, we just have to accept that, and accept the fact that we're fallible, we can make mistakes, and also accept and know that we can course correct, that we can come back to that core. So were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's so true. Let's also say this, in the midst of my optimism, every now and then it has a cloudy day.
Oh, sure, fair enough.
And then I'll say, okay, there's the exception. There's nothing good than that person, right?
No, right.
Which is my own drift.
We can all think of, people throughout history that can be labeled safely as being the exception to that rule. So in terms of, so once the drift is noticed, I'm sort of thinking through this in a procedural way. Once that drift is noticed, I guess that may be the most important, that awareness may be the most important step in terms of getting, to use the metaphor, getting back to the shoreline. But what are some of the steps? I can imagine that there are people listening or watching this and they're saying, I thought my life was going to be this way, or I thought I would be able to do this with my business. And because of the tyranny of the urgent, or because of my financial situation, I've had to make decisions, or I felt like I've had to make decisions or choices that have caused me to move away from the core of who I feel like I'm meant to be. And maybe they're coming to that awareness, or maybe they've had that awareness for a while, but they don't know what to do. They feel stuck. They can see the shoreline. They know they're drifting further away, but the oars are have floated away long ago. What are some ways, mentally, emotionally, physically, behaviorally, that someone can get back to the core of who they are.
Yeah. I'm gonna go back to the idea of digging to your core, knowing the core, and then daily coming back to check the core. I mean, think in organizations how much we measure today, measurements, and they do that on a regular basis. Now, that can also be a problem and put pressure on values, but the question is, are we connecting back to it? So as we're moving along, we're catching the drift sooner. But let's just say, in all the very valid things that you mentioned there, of the pressures, the human pressures that we face, either in a relationship or in a financial situation, or trying to figure out our business, or right. Let's take the pandemic. I mean, that It's been a horrific kind of situation for some business owners. Is that wherever you are, you can always re-anchor. And the worse it is, I assume that there are times where we need to think out loud with somebody else that we trust and have conversations about that. But I would also say this, that we oftentimes think things are always supposed to work out. If we're always supposed to be successful. Yeah. Oftentimes we are where we're supposed to be, even in the drift. And that where we are has the greatest opportunity to help us see even deeper. The problem with everything blowing and going, and I've actually said during this pandemic, and let me just say this, because I realize that there has been great tragedy and great loss through this experience. But I would also say that this pandemic is, when I think in terms of integrity and digging deeper to your core, this is, I would say, holy ground, that it rips away the veneer so we can see things in a way that are more honest, they're more clear, they're more truthful. Oftentimes when you're in a drift, the truth also is, it's that whole adage of when you hit rock bottom. Yeah. When you hit rock bottom, I can begin to climb again. I've actually got a foundation to begin. Now, I would prefer that it be tweaks along the way, that being at the bottom of the well, at that dark moment. But wherever you are, there's always the possibility to begin the correction. And it may take grace and it may take empathy. But that, I think the truth is, no matter where you are, there's always the opportunity to reset, to reconnect, to reintegrate to that integrity.
That's excellent. And I loved what you said about there's opportunity in the drift, because that really goes back to, the ancient saying, the obstacle is the way, right? And so it's within our problem or challenges or obstacles that we find the way back to where we were supposed to go. But save for having that experience, save for the drift, save for the obstacle, we would not have been able to get to where we were ultimately supposed to go in the first place. And I think not only is it, of course, reaffirming that we can get back to where we need to go, and maybe we had to be where we are in order to get there in the first place. But I think it's also just often just an axiom and a truth of life that we're not gonna go from point B is where we imagine we want to be, and point A is where we are. That probably can't be, or shouldn't be, or is not advantageous for it to be a straight line.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in many ways, I'd say, Scott, that we like to have integrity and values be like this clean, pure. Well, that's the veneer, right? Yeah. The truth is, it's messy and it's a wrestling match, and it's beautifully messy. And I think if we embrace that, we've got a much greater opportunity to understand it in ways we've never understood it before. And the truth is, when you really look at doing this yourself, you are in such a better position to not judge others, to have empathy for them, because you have more truthfulness about your own way of coming at this. And therefore, when others are drifting or struggling, you're not judging, you're helping. And there's a big difference in that.
Well, and I would imagine that so much of the work that the folks who are listening and watching this do is, whether they've thought about it in this way or not, I don't know. But I would imagine that so much of the work that they do at its core is helping organizations or individuals be pointed back in the right direction and re-anchor and get closer back to the shoreline. Even if it's somebody like me who's on the business development side of things, you may say, well, what does marketing and sales have to do with core values and drifting away from what an organization wants and needs to be? Well, I think if you just peel back one layer of that onion, to continue the mixed metaphors here, to peel back one layer of the onion, I think it has everything to do with it, right? How what is your value proposition? What are you trying to deliver to the marketplace? What results and outcomes can you help an organization create, or can you help an individual create? And the more anchored those things are, it seems to me that the easier the messaging, the easier it is to be a messenger, and the more authentic and genuine that message becomes. To that end, I want to talk a little bit about what have you seen in terms of in your own life and in the work with the organizational clients or the individuals that you've worked with on this topic. I can imagine what some of these things might be, but I'll have you maybe share some of these, and feel free to share an example that you'd like to. But in terms of results or outcomes, as someone gets more clarity, not to say we're going to be perfect, but when they get more clarity about what integrity means for them, they know what their core is, they get anchored to it, and they can notice that drift quicker, and they can take action quicker to re-anchor. What are some natural results or outcomes, either on a personal level or professional level, that you've seen?
Yeah, so let's start with personal, which is where I always start. One of the great pushbacks I get in organizations is, what does personal values have to do inside an organization? Isn't it about our organizational values? And frankly, most are terrified of personal values. And the reason is because they're confused about core values versus the behaviors, opinions, beliefs, needs, and wants. Right?
They're conflating the two, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But what I've said is personal values. Well, somebody will say, well, aren't personal values personal? And I said, yes, but they're also incredibly systemic. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you think that personal values belong in the workplace. They come through your door every single day, and that's true whether the person knows what they are or not. So why don't we gain the potential of what they are when they're discovered? And the truth is, with a leadership team in an organization, it's almost irresponsible to name the values of the organization without having done your own homework to begin with, because you're almost trying to name the values of an organization without an anchor yourself. And so what I would say is this, with so much measurement and so many metrics, I think this is one area where there's not a tangible measurement. There is an intuitive measurement, and leaders that really have dug to their core, they don't have to have a mechanical measurement to let them know what intuitively has become so clear to them.
Right.
I think that's also true at the individual level. You intuitively begin to know, am I drifting? Am I not drifting? You just have so much awareness about it that it can make a huge difference in that regard. One of the great risks on this is we've become so focused on in fact, many have written, if it's important, it's measurable, or we measure what we believe is important.
Right.
What if the most important things aren't mechanically measurable? And I think that's a bit of, what this is. I think the other thing for me, Scott, is this is hard. And so when you have a leader trying to do this, it is hard work. It takes an enormously courageous leader to stay the course, because what we want to do in business is we've got the plan, we got it done, we're good to go, right? This one isn't a good to go. It's always going, right? And so I think you have an intuitive nature to it. at an individual level, it keeps coming back every day. You just kind of check where you are on it and how am I doing with it, and what can I learn from it along the way, which is probably the best measurement that you can have to keep it on course, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's tremendous. That's absolutely. I hadn't thought about. Again, I'm in the business development space, so when it comes to exactly what you said, when I'm working with an individual organization, understandably and rightfully, we're measuring certain key KPIs, key performance indicators, and that's what we're looking at. Certainly, there is a intangible component of that, how someone feels about a message or how someone feels about a campaign. A whole lot of psychology, of course, in marketing and sales that hopefully is coming from a genuine and authentic place, as opposed to just trying to close the sale. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I totally get what you're saying. In the sense that what if the most important thing wasn't mechanically measurable? And I think if you were to ask a human being, not a consultant, not a CEO, but a human being, what's the most important thing? And, well, can you measure the most important thing in your life? They would say, well, not mechanically. No, not really. I can't really I can't quantify it. I can feel it. Mm-hmm. I know it. I have more comfort when that thing is true. I have more comfort. I have more confidence. I have more belief. I'm happier. I'm more fulfilled. But can I measure how far? Can I measure how far in drift I am? I know I'm further away than I should be, further away than I want to be. But I don't know that I can measure that. And maybe not only is the fact that it's hard just part of the natural criteria of it. Maybe it's one of those things that can't be measured, and I'm kind of coming to this realization on my own. I suspect that you're light years ahead of me, John, but maybe it can't be measured because it's not supposed to be measured.
That's brilliant. That really is brilliant, because that changes everything. You're trying to do something that was never meant to be done. And that always creates quite a dilemma. I haven't thought about this in a while, but there was a prospect. It's a large healthcare health system, mm-hmm. and they were challenged on their patient scores, which are a 1 to 5. They had brought in a major consulting firm to work with them, and they had gotten it to a 4, but they were stuck. Mm-hmm. And one of the executives said, John, I think what you talk about is exactly why we're stuck. And so we planned way ahead because they wanted the CEO on the call. One of the great indicators was, although we had built the whole meeting around the CEO's schedule, they canceled right before the call to be on the call. Now, I don't know what the reason was, sure. but you could feel it in the room that the mm-hmm. CEO had not made it a priority. Which I think in some ways gave them even almost more permission to be the devil's advocate. And so I could feel the questioning begin to mount until one of them actually asked the question, John, with what you do, how can you guarantee us that it's going to get us from a 4 to a 5?
Wow.
And I was frankly, let's just be real clear, I was getting a little frustrated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I just said, the truth is everything in my soul will say that if you will do this, it's going to make a huge difference. But what I will also say is that if this is the reason that you're doing it, it will not work, because the truth is you really don't care about core values. All you care about is getting to a 5, and it will undermine the very essence of what you're trying to do. Wow.
I mean, and therein is the lesson. We do get so, and it's the, we can talk about why this is the case, but it is the case. We do so often get caught up in the quantifiable measurement of those types of things. And to some extent, it makes sense why we get caught up in those things. But to your point, in terms of the work that you were doing in that example, the work that I think consultants do as a rule, regardless of what their area of expertise is in, what is the core driver? What is the core motivator behind this action? If it is merely superficial, mm-hmm. then how meaningful can it really be? And that is really, really important. I make a statement like that and say, well, of course that's true. But yes, of course it's true. But how often is it truly thought about and intentionally applied is the question. And so just getting me, and I know everybody else, to think in this way is tremendously beneficial. John, I just looked down. I don't know where the time went. It drifted away. I could literally continue this conversation for, the rest of the evening here. I want to be cognizant of time for you and our listeners and viewers. If you're open to it, we may have to have a part 2 at some point in the future. This has absolutely been phenomenal. I simply can't thank you enough. I do want to end with a question that I'm really I'm excited to ask this question every time, but especially to you, sir. And that is, in terms of your career, personally or professionally, what is a lesson or lessons learned that you might impart to those who are watching and listening today?
Yeah, and I'll put this in context of the career. Probably the personal would be a list way too long that we got time for of what I learned by probably drifting. What I would say is this, and I kind of alluded to it earlier about I saw myself as a speaker, not a messenger. Mm-hmm. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have waited till year 6 to begin to write. I would have started writing much sooner. And it's one of the things I've always said to people thinking about writing a book. One of the greatest things about writing, whether it's a blog or a book or whatever the case may be, you understand your thinking when you force it down to paper. And I really found that my clarity only began when I started writing. And that's really where I went from general leadership to core values to integrity, is that I really forced myself to be much more clear in what I was trying to say. And it therefore then made my presentations more clear, my conversations more clear in the work that I was doing. So that, I wouldn't worry about, do I ever publish a book? It's more about the writing part, which is why blogs can be so good, is that it forces you to commit to paper, as I think one of the great things I learned along the way. Yeah,
that's an excellent note, and one that everybody here can apply. The reality is, if you are already writing, you probably are nodding your head in agreement with John. And if you're not, then this is a tremendous note. That's a great lesson. Thank you, John. I am certain that besides me, other folks are going to want to stay in touch with you and learn more about your work. And you mentioned the Circle of Integrity that you have that's publicly available to individuals. If someone wants to learn more about you, the Circle of Integrity, get a copy of a book, what's the best way for them to enter into your world?
Yeah, so probably the best way is just to go to my website, and you can reach that by going to blumbergroi.com. And on the Circle, it's the same thing, blumbergroi.com / and the word circle. Okay. And that'll give you an overview. It gives you dates of the cohorts, as well. And there is a public version anyone can join, and they're generally about 4 cohorts a year. And then there is a private one, like for a leadership team, that can go through it privately, but all together. Sure. And then the books would be on the website as well. So
excellent.
It's been great being with you, Scott, and so enjoyed the conversation. I'd love a part 2. You're helping me think, so I love it.
Well, I'm going to take you up on it. So you said it. We've got it recorded now, John. No, I sincerely appreciate your willingness to do a part 2. But first and foremost, to be here today and to invest the time and share your knowledge and expertise with everybody. I know that for me, I've already got 3 pages of notes again, and a lot more to think about that is going to continue to keep me anchored or bring me back to shore. So I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate your work and what you do. So please don't stop.
All right. I appreciate that, Scott. So good to be with you.
Thank you. For Consulting with Authority, everyone, this is Scott Cantrell, as always, wishing you all the best of success. Thank you for listening. I hope you got a ton of value out of this episode. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor of our show, Smart Solutions Media. Smart Solutions Media empowers business owners, consultants, and other independent professionals to easily attract better prospects and transform them into long-term clients. If you're a B2B consultant or service professional and would like to start filling your pipeline with better quality prospects, Visit us on the web at smartsolutionsmedia.com to learn more about what we can do to help you. Be sure to complete the short 2-minute accelerated growth scorecard you can find on the website, and you'll receive a complimentary strategy session where we'll give you specific insights and recommendations to help you attract high-value clients. Until next time, make sure you are consulting with authority.